Hello and welcome to Stompbox Build Up. That's right, in this video we're going to be building a pedal. So this is going to be a longer episode than normal, but I think it's going to be interesting, hopefully motivating, and I'm going to do my best to keep it moving along. Now, guitar pedals are not magic. There's a signal flowing through a couple of electrical components, and you're using those components to shape the signal so it comes out differently. And there's a fantastic video on Brian Wampler's YouTube channel where he shows building a pedal from scratch, and it's pretty amazing. You should check that out after you've watched this. There's a couple companies that make pedal building kits, and you can find them on sites like eBay, Reverb, StewMac, BuildYourOwnClone.com. I got this box of stuff off of an eBay auction that cost me a total of $23.23, and it was marked as used, but all the parts were there. So it looks like somebody opened it up and then decided not to build it. So that's a win for me. And you just never know what you're going to get when you buy stuff off of eBay. This came with the pedal kit, and it was marked as a distortion pedal. It's actually a fuzz pedal, but that's cool. I don't have enough fuzz pedals. Maybe I'll like it. It also came with this CD. Came with a CD, so I'll find a way to listen to that. And it came with this shirt. So I'd say right off the bat, we're off to a great start. Okay, first off, the things you'll need. You'll want a clean, well-lit environment, which is why I'll be shooting most of this from my desk. Hey there. Seriously, find yourself a good spot to work on this so you can see what you're doing and you can find parts if they roll off the table. You'll also need a medium-sized Phillips head screwdriver. You'll also probably need something to attach the knobs to the pots, and that might be a little hex wrench or a small flathead, depends what kind of knobs you have. You'll also need wire cutters and a pair of cutting pliers, and a pair of needle nose pliers always comes in handy. For tightening up jacks, I'm going to be using this thing. It's sometimes called a guitar knob puller or a guitar wrench. It's good for, well, pulling guitar knobs off guitars without damaging the finish because it's got this soft felt backing. You can also use it for loosening and tightening nuts using these little ridges, and it's perfect for this, so think about picking one up. Now, the elephant in the room, we're gonna be soldering a lot. So you'll also need a soldering iron, solder, and a solder tip cleaner. And if you haven't soldered before, don't worry, I'm gonna teach you how. In fact, we're gonna do that right now so I can show you that it's really nothing to be afraid of. You can get a standard soldering kit from your local hardware store, auto parts store, or if you can wait a couple days, just order it online. Save a couple bucks too. You'll want a 30 to 40 watt pencil style iron. Don't get the gun, as cool as it looks. If you can afford it, I definitely recommend getting a digital soldering station. That will let you set the exact temperature of your tip, which will generally result in less frustration and heartache. Your solder should be a 0.6 or a 0.8 millimeter thickness, right around the thickness of a typical D string. There is leaded and lead-free solder. Leaded solder is easier to work with. It's got a lower melting point, resists cracking, but it has lead in it, which could be bad. However, it's only really bad if you eat it or you directly huff the fumes. So if you go with a leaded solder, just don't do that. In fact, don't do that with unleaded solder either. Let's just make this really easy. Don't eat any of this stuff. All right? The secret to trouble-free soldering is a clean, hot tip. So have one of these solder tip cleaners or a damp sponge nearby. And before heating up your tip, make sure it's in there nice and tight. Because if it's not, the heat will never reach the tip and you'll have a real hard time melting the solder. Give the tip a couple minutes to heat up and then do your cleaning. It'll make things go a whole lot smoother. And obviously be very careful of that hot tip around yourself, others, things. Make sure it goes back into its holder and never leave it unattended. Got that? Good, let's move on and let's get down to it. We're gonna make a pedal. All right, let's start out with soldering basics. Soldering works by heating up a very small area of a conductive surface, usually where there's two conductors touching, and then you heat up the metal where they're touching. Then you flow solder into the area so it melts onto the conductive surfaces. Then, once you remove the heat, the solder quickly solidifies and it creates a mechanical and electrical connection. I'm going to show making a few connections on this bare board I have. I've grabbed a couple photo resistors, which I had from another project I was working on, because of course I did. And I'm going to show you just how easy this is. So the first thing we're going to do is get our electrical component in place. So I'm just going to feed the legs of this photoresistor through the board like this. And we'll just pick any two holes on here and feed them through like this. Now on the other side, we've got these two metal leads. So we're just going to spread those apart. And that makes it so this doesn't fall out and we can start soldering. So let's put that right there. Soldering is a 4-step process. We're going to add heat, wait until the joint warms up, then add solder in until we've got enough. Then we're going to remove the solder, and then we're going to keep the heat on there long enough until that solder kind of flows into every nook and cranny on there, and we've got a good electrical and mechanical connection. Let's do it. So add heat. I'm going to start with this leg on the left first. Add heat. Flow the solder in. All right. Now remove the solder, remove heat. We're going to do the exact same thing on the other leg. So add heat. Add solder. Remove solder, remove heat. And just like that, we have soldered a photoresistor onto a circuit board. All right, now that that's done, we've got two other really important things to do. First thing, clean your solder tip. Do this between every component. Do it obsessively. I've got this thing right here, which is full of like, I don't know, like copper wool or something like that. Just drag it through there. And then put it back in its holder. Get it out of the way. And then the next thing, we want to snip off these leads so they're not dangling out into our pedal. So I'm going to take these wire cutters and just go snip, snip. And there we go. We've just soldered our first component. Our solder tip is clean and we're ready to keep going. Let's do it one more time and I won't interrupt, just so you can watch it from start to finish. Look, this stuff takes a lot of practice, and anyone who really knows what they're doing knows that these are far from perfect, but it's good enough to get us going. So let's see what's in the box. All right, so within the box, we've got a box. This is the pedal enclosure. It's already been drilled, painted, and labeled, which is nice. It might look black on here. Actually, no, it shows up. It's a dark, sparkly purple, which is nice. I'm glad this is already done for us because drilling, painting, and labeling enclosures is my least favorite part of making pedals. They tend to come out not good. We've also got a little box with feet and screws that will go on the enclosure. So let's just put those in here so we don't lose them later on. We've got a box of knobs, jacks, a switch, power jack, and 9-volt battery strap plug. So that's good. Those look like they'll come in handy later on. Oh, we've got our instructions. Okay. All right, the instructions are not great. They're basically a picture of the pedal and where things go. There's no step-by-step guides. Sometimes you get that, but we're still good. We're still good because this tells us all the important stuff of where stuff goes. But we'll be using that. We got a thank you card. You're welcome. There's the circuit board. That's kind of important. Looks pretty nice, nicely labeled. I'm seeing one thing on here that I don't really like much at all. We'll get to that later. Let's put that back in the box, keep it safe. We got a bag of wires. These look like 4 or 5 inch, maybe 12 or 15 of them. Red, black, and white, pre-trimmed on the leads at least. That's nice. And we got a bag full of nothing but resistors. We're going to be using a lot of these. These are pre-labeled too, so that's good. And then we got this bag, which has, ooh, there's lots of goodies in here. We got diodes. We got 6 diodes. 6 diodes. Oh, seven diodes. Spoiler alert, there's actually 8 diodes in here. We'll get to that later. There's some potentiometers, capacitors, an IC, 2 ICs, 2 chips, and 2 chip sockets. All right. There's some things I like, there's some things I don't like, but let's put this bad boy together. Actually, I lied. Before we start putting stuff together, I want to spend just a little bit of time talking about some of the components that we're going to be using, because you're going to be spending time with them. You might be wondering just what they do. So let's start with these resistors. We've got a lot of them. And a resistor resists. It's like a speed bump for electricity, and they can be used to lower the voltage of a circuit before it gets to an LED or a chip so it doesn't burn out. Or if we've got a circuit like this, and this is some sort of distortion or a clipping stage, we can set how much of the signal goes through that part of the circuit by making it harder to go around it with a resistor. That's the symbol for a resistor, that little zigzag pattern there. And resistors have a value measured in ohms, sometimes kiloohms, which is just 1,000 ohms. And that's a unit of electrical resistance. And these are all labeled, looks like by hand. You can also determine the value of a resistor by reading these little color bands on the side of them and then looking them up on a chart or a web page or something like that. So that's resistors. I spent a bit of time talking about them because, well, there's a lot of them and we're going to be spending a lot of time with them. At least I will. I'll probably fast forward through the build process. I also want to spend some time talking about capacitors, and these are all capacitors, even though they look pretty different. Capacitors are like little buckets that fill up with electrical charge, and then once they get full, they dump all that electrical charge out. And they can be used to do a lot of interesting things. But in pedals, they're typically used to filter out low frequencies, or filter out high frequencies, depending on how they're set up. A capacitor of a certain value will let high frequencies flow right through them. Low frequencies don't see that as a viable path to follow, and they'll take the other path. So when you turn down the tone knob on your guitar, what you're doing is you're opening up a path for the high frequencies to exit the signal path and go to the ground. Capacitors can also be used to clean up an electrical signal and do a lot of other interesting things, but let's just keep moving. And we're moving right on to diodes. These are 3 types of diodes right here, and diodes are used for 2 different purposes in guitar pedals, primarily. Sometimes they're used to control the voltage within a pedal to protect the components and make sure you don't accidentally fry something again. I bet that's what this one is used for anyway. They're also used to create clipping of a signal since they wake up at a certain voltage and distort the signal. More about that in the OS2 video I uploaded a couple weeks back. Thing about diodes is they act like a one-way valve. They let electricity flow through them only in one direction. So you have to make absolutely sure they're facing the right direction. Look at the markings on the board here. They actually show a little black bar on one side where the 6 types of diodes are going to go. So you have to make sure that the little black bar on the diode corresponds with the black bar of where they're going to go. Otherwise, you're not going to get much signal, or at least not a good signal anyway.
We've got another type of diode here. This is an LED, and you typically think of this as a light, but LED stands for light emitting diode. Some pedals actually use these as their clipping diodes. Almost all pedals use them to let you know that the pedal is on. With LEDs, the shorter side is the negative side, so we'll have to make sure we note that when we put it in and before clipping off the leads. It also comes with not one, but two chips. Now, just because a pedal has a chip like this doesn't mean it's a digital pedal. These are just ICs, integrated circuits, and most amplifier circuits come in this format. This is a UA741CP. It's an amplifier circuit. Rather, inside, there's an amplifier circuit. And it looks like this is what came in the MXR Distortion Plus for a while. So we're in good company. We've also got a 4558 chip. This is a dual op-amp circuit. There's actually two amplifier circuits in here, like this. And you'll find a 4558 chip in the Tube Screamer and the original OD1, among others. And there's a lot of amplification happening in this pedal, apparently. I'll also point out that they gave us these little chip sockets, so that way we're soldering these sockets and not applying heat directly to the legs of the chip, which might be more sensitive to heat. So we're going to solder down the legs of this thing and then put the chip in, making sure to note which edge has the notch. That's how we know which way this goes in. So now that we know our components, let's really get started soldering these things down. I'm going to kind of start on one end and just work my way down. So I'm double checking the alignment of my diodes on here before I solder anything down, making sure the little black bar is on the right, also the correct side here, and that looks good. So I'm just gonna start soldering this down. And there we go, we've got our first components down, our diodes for, I'm assuming, one of the clipping stages, and we get to do the same thing in the reverse order over here. All right, now all of our diodes are on the board, all of our clipping diodes at least. Let's move on to some resistors. That was a lot of resistors, but I'm happy to say the board is fully populated with them right now. So let's get this other diode on the board, and then we'll get started with the capacitors. Now with capacitors, some of them have the values written right on them, like these electrolytic capacitors. Some of them, like this, let's pull it down here. Some of these, they do not have the value written on them, and instead you have to look up the code. Easiest way to do that is just online. You want to find the 3 digits, like this one says 224. And if I enter in 224 on this web page over here, it says that it is 0.22 microfarads. That's the UF. So I'm just going to label these all at once. So this one is 0.22 microfarads. And I'm going to do that with all the rest of them so that I can find them more easily as I continue to populate the board. So you might have been seeing this guy right here has been giving me a little bit of trouble. Initially, I thought this was the 4.7 microfarad one. I've been trying to line it up with the list of capacitors in the instructions here. I looked up the code, and 472J is just a fancy way of saying 0.0047 microfarads. So now we have all of our capacitors listed on the instructions, and we have them all, get back here, all labeled out nicely. We can continue putting this thing together. We've got our resistors, capacitors, and diodes on the board, and it's really starting to come together. Look at that color starting to pop on there. Next, we've got to put the sockets for our ICs on there, and again, we're going to line up the notch on here with the notch on the board. Notice one faces one way, one faces the other, so we're going to pay attention to that as we solder them onto the board. We've got our sockets in place. The chips will go in there, but not yet. We're going to save that for later. But when they do, I don't know if you can see that there's a little circle on the chip. That goes on the side with the notch. That indicates the home position. But like I said, we're not going to put it in yet. I'm going to keep those safe and off to the side until we actually need them. I mentioned before there's the thing on the circuit board that I don't really care for, and we're up to that part right now. Right up here, 3PDT. That stands for 3 poles, dual throw. And that's where the switch goes. And we've got the switch right here. It seems like a perfectly fine switch. 3 poles down the middle, 1, 2, 3. And then dual throw. It's got 2 positions. We can think of them as on and off, but technically it's connecting this guy to this guy, this guy to this guy, this guy to this guy, and you click it again, it goes this guy to this guy, this guy to this guy, this guy to this guy. That was fun to say. And it's a perfectly fine switch. It's going to go onto the board like this. We're going to solder it in. It's going to be pretty easy. The thing I don't like about this is that our mechanical switch is physically connected to our board. So every time we step on our pedal to turn it on, we're gonna introduce a big shock, a big, impact shock to the board. And if our solders weren't incredibly perfect in every imaginable way, that would be the force that would shake them loose, or maybe even shake a chip out of its socket, which is why we're gonna attach that with just a little bit of glue when we put those on. So the better way to do this is to run wires between the switch and the board and mount this directly just to the case. This is a way of doing it. It also ensures that we don't screw up the wiring at all. So maybe they did that on purpose. It's just not the way that I like to see this done. And as long as I'm complaining, something else I'm not a huge fan of. These potentiometers, these are ultimately going to go through here, and our knobs are going to attach to those. We'll use them to adjust the sustain, tone, and volume of the effect. You'll notice they don't exactly line up with where they're supposed to go on this board. S1, S2, S3 for sustain, T1, T2, T3 for tone, V1, V2, V3 for volume. And these, these just don't fit through there. They're completely different spacings. So what we have to do is take these wires here, and I really don't like this. This is a sloppy way of doing this, but okay, we'll do it. We need to draw connections or install wires between our potentiometers and our board here. So let's take a look at our instructions. And you can see we've got 3 potentiometers: sustain, tone, volume. Luckily, in our case, they're all the same values. They're B10K. Marker's running out. So we don't need to worry about mixing them up. But if you're doing another pedal, you might have some that start with an A, and they might be 250K or 500K. Just make sure you don't mix up your pots. On this one, they're all the same, B10K. Make sure that's in frame. So what I'm gonna do, because I know I'm gonna mess this up if I don't. I'm just gonna label 3 is red, 2 is white, and 1 is black. So that way they're gonna be the same when I start wiring these up, and hopefully I won't mess it up. So I'm gonna do the potentiometers first and then install them into the board. And to do this, we're gonna do something slightly differently than we've been doing it before. This is the back. Oh man, this is gonna be, okay, here's a little hack. Do it like this, stick it in. Okay, we're gonna do something called tinning the lead. That sounds like a skate move. But actually what it is it's getting enough solder onto the parts ahead of time so that when you introduce them together and heat them up, they stick together and you're not just shoving solder into it. So I am going to heat up. Is that in the frame? Nope. All right, let's move it over here a little bit. I'm going to heat up. Let's clean my tip. Make sure we want it really nice and clean for this. Heat this up. Add solder. Get the tip just covered in solder as much as we can. All right, got a little bit of solder on there. We're going to do the same thing to the tip over here. Okay. So now we've got 2 surfaces that have solder on them. We should be able to, man, I really don't like this. Should be able to heat this up, bring this in, sit it on top of it, or under it, whatever. Remove heat. It's solidified, and now we have an electrical connection there. So we've wired our 1 pin to a black, and we're going to do the same thing for the rest of them for the rest of the potentiometers. I really don't like this. This is not a good way to save money on your pedal. I wish they didn't do this. But at least you get to fast forward through this while I do the rest of them. I'll also take this opportunity to point out that these are not the highest quality potentiometers. These are not what you would find in a typical handmade pedal. These are what you'd find in like a home stereo or something like that. They'll be fine. They won't fail. They won't scratch or anything like that more than any other one will. But you have to be really careful with the amount of heat that you apply around this because it's very easy to melt the plastic body on these. So just be careful of that. I've got 1 down. I've got 2 more to go. Normally, I just wouldn't even bother with the battery clip, but if I end up giving this to somebody else and they don't have a power source, I want them to be able to use it, so I'm going to wire this in. Now it's time to deal with the issue of the LED, and I say the issue because as you saw with the potentiometers, the board is not in agreement with the case. And on our board, the LED is over here. Actually, let's flip this around so it matches the case. Our LED is up here. That's the positive, and that's a negative right there. That's off center from this jack up here, this hole up here. And I want that to line up. And one of the ways you can do it is to solder it to the board and bend it over. I don't like doing that because it's very likely that our leads will touch and it will short out. So we're going to do the same thing we did with the potentiometers and solder wire leads to them. So now we've got our LED wired up with leads. It's not the prettiest thing in the world, but now we can wire this to the board and these aren't going to short out against each other. There's not a whole lot left on my board here. I've got some jacks and some knobs, 1 power jack and 2 1/4-inch audio jacks. I'm going to use the guide here. This actually spells out where to wire the I/O jack. has it labeled. And the same thing with the DC jack. Make sure I'm getting the right sides because those are labeled on the board. And man, we're getting so close. I hope my battery doesn't go dead before we're done because I don't want to wait. I want to get this done now. Let's go. So we've got our input jack and our output jack. The input jack has the extra red lead on here. And I'm laughing because I'm thinking about the mistake that I was about to make, and I think I've made every time I've made a pedal. The power plug right here goes into the pedal over here. And you'll notice that it has a flanged end on it. You can't wire that up from the inside. It has to go in first. So this is going to be the first thing that we actually build into our pedal. Normally what I would do is I would solder this up and then go, oh no, I have to unsolder this, put it in from the outside and resolder it all again. So I'm glad that I caught it this time, although I'm sure there's something else I'm going to mess up too. So let's just get that in place. This is where our needle nose pliers come in handy. Yeah, just like that. And now that's actually going to help because it's going to hold it in place for us. Scoot this down a little bit so you can see it. Starting to get messy in here. And now we're going to wire our input plug and 2 more wires. Oh, man. Okay, I got a red one. We're good. And our wires to our plug. And, oh, man, we're so close. We're so close. All right, moment of truth. I've got my pedal. It's put together except for the back. I've got a jack running over to my PV Classic 30, lovely little amp. I've got a 9-volt jack, and I've got this going over to my Fender Strat over here. So let's plug the guitar in. Let's plug the power in, and let's just see if we get a light. All right, the light goes on. That's a good thing. So that the power is wired right. It's at least happy in that aspect. Let's plug the amp in. Now the pedal is off. The volume is all the way down. With the pedal off, we should get a bypass signal. Cool. All right, that sounded beautiful. So our guitar works. Our guitar passes through when the pedal is off. All right, so I'm going to turn on now. Light comes on. I'm going to bring the volume up. I hear something going on, and fuck. All right, apparently we've got some more debugging to do. Why don't you just work? Hello? Hello? That can't be it. That's it. All right, so here's the deal. I thought maybe it was one of the jacks and that in fixing the input jack, I had accidentally unfixed it. Nope, that wasn't the case. Jack's all good. Then I thought maybe it was one of the chips, wasn't in all the way, was in backwards, leg wasn't down. Nope, chips are good. Then I started poking around on my connections with a multimeter, just making sure that connectivity is where it's supposed to be and not where it's not supposed to be. And all the grounds were good, the power was going to all the right places. And then I noticed 2 points on the back that were joined that looked like maybe they weren't supposed to be joined. And sure enough, there was a bridge between them. So I desoldered them, bent the pins back away from one another, resoldered them, made sure there's no connection, and I think we're ready to go. We've solved a problem. I don't know if it's the problem, but we solved a problem. So, moment of truth, part 2. Plug in our amp. All right. Okay. So bypass signal. So that's good. That's good. All right. Oh, I hear something. It sounds fuzzy. Oh yeah, that's definitely a fuzz pedal. Let's get downstairs and check it out in further detail.
Actually, before I give it a playthrough, I want to point out something else I had to do. I noticed that the back of the circuit board was very close to the back of the enclosure, and that's not good because they can ground out or short circuit or something if they touch. So I took that thank you note they sent and I cut it into the shape of the back plate and just kind of stuck it in there. Someday, years from now, someone's going to open up this pedal and be like, "You're welcome." All right, for real, let's see what we have created. So here's the clean and the pedal. One of the fun things about building pedals for me is that you don't know exactly what they're supposed to sound like unless they're a direct clone. Nothing sounds obviously wrong to me, so I'm going to chalk this one up to a resounding success. And to me, the pedal sounds like radish in some areas and muff-ish in others, if that makes sense. I'm sure it's a direct copy of something, I'm not really sure. And to be honest, I don't really care. To me, the fun was in building the pedal, and I had fun even with the problems. Those were not planned, and I left them in there because I think it's important to show that any problem with a pedal like this can be traced down and fixed. Pedals are just little circuits, and circuits can be traced. And think about this. What if I got the pedal together and decided, you know what? I don't like the way this sounds. And what if I replaced one of those chips with something else, or a 22K resistor with a 33K resistor? What if I replaced one of those 6 diodes with a simple piece of wire, or a fancy Cold War Russian space diode? I think that's how a lot of folks got into modding pedals, which eventually got them into building their own creation. The point is, you can do this. You saw this pedal start off just 38 minutes ago as a couple of baggies of stuff, and now it's a real deal fuzz pedal that can go on your board. Or at least on your shelf. Hey, I had a lot of fun with this. I hope you did too, and I hope to see you on the next Stompbox Breakdown. Or Build Up. I might do it again.